D.
Welcome to 1001 Ways to Cope with Stress. I am Professor Kinshasa Shabaka, and we are now beginning part two of Dr. Manderson's wonderful presentation on the Temple of Luxor in Egypt.
Thank you for having me again, Professor, to continue our discussion regarding the Temple of Luxor. As we ended, I wanted to include the fact that there was a still higher purpose. We know that the purpose of the Temple of Luxor was to celebrate the open festival of the god Amun and his wife being in accoutrement for a 24-day period. But there was also a higher purpose in which I never got to in the first segment, but is the unfolding enlightenment generated in initial conception and ultimate construction is a mind-boggling experience. We have to understand that Genesis is the expansion of consciousness and thought is consciousness in action. And this is what these Africans in ancient times were able to conceptualize while the world more or less fluttered in utter darkness. Mentally, that is, of course, okay? And it goes to the heart of the question of whose legacy is this? And we're not about to give it up. Uh, I'm reminded of one of the great symbolists of the 20th century, certainly I would say of all time, in modern times that is, was a Frenchman called Choiseul de Lubis. He spent more than a dozen years in the temple, measuring every piece of stone, and he wrote several works related to the temple. One is called The Temple of Man. It's a two-volume, enormous compendium with illustrations, plates, texts, and explanations. And then he wrote, his earlier piece was The Temple in Man. So we have The Temple of Man, which is a two-volume work, and The Temple of Man, which is a single volume. And then I have here the Egyptian Miracle, and then there's another one called Her Back and stuff like that. But the whole idea of kingship. And I would love to come back and do a segment on the Egyptian king, which I've done somewhere before, but not with you. And I think that
I would love to.
your audience deserves to
Appreciate
know
that.
more about that.
Absolutely.
So what he does say in this two volume that was really written in French in 1953 and we released in English in 1998 is that Karnak, the twin temple, Karnak and Luxor, Karnak is where Amun lives and Luxor is where he visits and he's also worshipped there. Karnak is the royal temple of synthesis because it took more or less like 2,000 years to build that temple and its attachments. Karnak is the temple, royal temple synthesis. Luxor is the cathedral of higher teaching. And further that, it is teaching for the understanding. The symbolism that Luxor represents is teaching for the understanding, for the pure intellect, which no explicit word can describe. That is to say that we said that it was unique, and in follow-up, we'll talk about some of its uniqueness. This Temple of Luxor was considered a house of life because really the temple is actually a representation of God in man living. This human person is such a phenomenal experiment in science, theology, spirituality that, as Professor James Small would like to say, man is God having a human experience. You know, I mean, you think about it. What there was an
Very
ad.
existential.
There's an ad on television talks about the body has several billion um, nerves, several billion nerves. I mean, to think in terms of that, you know what, and that's why we said in the earlier segment that if the world set out to bring good into life, we would be in a better place. Everybody would be happy. So it is the quintessential Egyptian temple for a number of reasons. Okay, so that there are later temples such as Dendera, Edfu, even Philae, beautiful in their workmanship and conception, but these are later temples. So we're looking at which one of the arguments made about these Africans is that they were the genesis of their own genius. They were writing on a tabula rasa, which is an empty slate. There was no one in which to copy what they had done. So whatever they had done was original. And hence, the Temple of Luxor was, in many respects, an original creation, whereas the temples of Dendera, Edfu, Philae, and so on, beautiful in their own conception, but there were copies of earlier works, and there was a library of processes and a methodology of how to build that they were able to utilize, which was created by the earlier sages who built temples such as Luxor and so forth. It was built in the golden age of the Middle 18 dynasties when the empire ruled the world. These Africans, and it's interesting how in his book on civilization or barbarism, Chikante Diop, the Senegalese great mind, he talks about something that nobody does, which is to say that when during this golden age, this empire period, the world bowed down to the African, to the black man. They came and ate the dust and brought their wealth and laid it at the feet of these people. Today, the world has reversed itself, and we are considered, African people are considered not to have done anything in terms of advancing the cause of humanity. But that is not true.
How untrue.
All that we have done has been stolen, misappropriated, misrepresented, distorted, a lot of it omitted. But famous Americans said, we have not begun to fight this yet. So the battle is not over. So we have come to recognize in the Temple of Luxor that architecture is a living language, and that the goal of life is consciousness. Why am I here? We're here to elevate the mind, and in that process, help humanity to get across the river, so to speak, to get to that place of divine understanding and worship and give back and creativity and so forth. So we know that Amenhotep III built Luxor Temple, but we have to see the purpose behind the actual mechanics of the temple, which is to say that, first of all, that no pharaonic temple is a replica of another. In many respects, they are similar, but they are different. And that without philosophy, there is no architecture. So philosophy and architecture go together. And this is interesting because Teofilo Benga, in his book African Philosophy 2780 to 330 BC, argued that the whole notion of the word philosophy, it's divorced from Greece, because there was no language, there was no term in Greece, in the Grecian language, to describe philosophy. So even though falsely Greece is credited with originating philosophy, all the Greek philosophers studied at the feet of the Africans and then went home and reworked what they had learned. And modern Western men give them credit for inventing everything, which in fact they admitted, listen, we didn't do it, the Africans did it. and this is what we have to recognize. First of all, in this respect, that architecture is living language. I speak about this symbolist, Schwaller de Lewis, in his books and what have you. He says that the temple, the purpose and the design of the temple is that the building can speak in all ways through the material. When you go there and you stand up and you look at this miracle that the mind of man has created, you have to be awed in wonder. So it can speak through the material, the foundation, the plan, the elevation, the covering, the lighting, the orientation, not to mention the site. You know, we're becoming familiar with the architecture, the tectonics of the temple. I was in a couple of years ago in the Temple of Luxor, and I told you how, first of all, Dr. Ben has said to us, 60% of what the guys teach you is nonsense. So if you're going to go, then you need to do a little reading to be familiar with what you're seeing, and you have to press the guides. So here I am in the Ramessian front of the Temple of Luxor, and I'm working out, doing my photography and what have you, and I happen to glance a guide leading some Asian people into the temple. And this temple is about 285 meters, okay? Honestly, and you have to trust me on this. 1 minute and 30 seconds later, I see these people walking out of the temple with the guide. 1 minute and 30 seconds. What could you see?
You could hardly lay eyes on it.
You know, I mean, some say that, well, they went there to take a selfie to say, I was there, but they didn't learn anything. And we encourage, you know, again, we come back to Dr. Ben Johanan. He's always insisted that temple architecture is the most profound contribution that the Egyptians had made. And take your time and study what you're looking at. Not necessarily the decoration, which is principally the ritual of the temple, but the way in which the architects put together this wonderful piece of creation. So the temple will celebrate, we said that it's designed to celebrate the Opet festival. We must remember, we have to come to a point of realization that Genesis is the expansion of consciousness, and thought is consciousness in action, as I just told you. And that Karnak is a royal temple of synthesis, while Luxor is a cathedral of high learning. The builders of temples such as Luxor set out to create symbolic and geometric precision. That is to say, unless every T is crossed and every dot is dotted, the God is not going to enter. He's not going. You want to invoke the God to come to his home, because there is a ceremony at foundation called giving the temple to its master. And unless everything is precise and exact, he's not going to come. So the architects, we know that the king commissions the work, but it's the architect who builds it. And then at the end, the king inspects the work to see that the work has been done properly. In all of this, as the sages have continuously reminded us, man is made in the image of God. And in that interaction, man and his works must seek to be as exact and precise as God would require, so that they could both live in harmony, man and God. Because for the most part, man is not only a creation of God, in many respects, he is God living in man. And again, you want to know how this duality can exist and people can still be or practice, I don't want to say evil, but ungood. And our essential purpose in life is to do good, to bring good into the world, and to love our fellow man within the philosophic construct of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. The Pharaonic temple needs to be conceived as fruit, living fruit that that is generated through a seed of life and goodness. I haven't said much about the Opet Festival, but the Opet Festival again is one of the principal festivals of the New Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, but the New Kingdom especially, because we don't have much evidence of the practice in the New Kingdom. But again, thanks to Tutankhamun, we have the illustrations on the east and west wall of the processional colonnade that tells us what really happened. And in her book called Upper Egypt, Historical Outline and Descriptive Guide to the Ancient Sites, Jill Camille tells us that the reliefs that give a full picture of this joyous festival are in poor condition. However, the procession begins, she describes now what happens. So the procession begins on the right-hand wall of Karnak Temple. And when you go in, because you're heading into the temple like this, so again, right is, the western wall is to the right, the eastern wall is to the left. We must keep in mind, of course, that the God looks out and and the visitors look in, right? So in order to get a proper understanding of what is happening, you have to enter and you have to go to the south end of the western wall and traverse the full length of the wall to see where the procession begins. Even though the procession begins that way, you have to read it this way. And the second way, when it returns, you go to the eastern wall and you read it this way. The procession begins on the right-hand wall of Karnak Temple, where the white-robed priests bear the sacred barge of Amun out of the gate at Karnak and down to the river's edge. The people clap their hands in unison. Acrobats perform. There are priestesses with sistrums or rattles, people dancing and some kneeling in adoration. The procession makes its way upstream. The king's chariot is on a boat, which is towed like the sacred barge of Amun. Finally, there is a sacrifice and offerings are made to Amun, Mut, and Khonsu at Luxor Temple. They've arrived to begin the festivity, the fanfare, and so forth and so on. On the opposite wall, the eastern wall, which is after the ceremony is over, the 24 period has expired and they're returning now. So you read it from the western wall. And if you're there, we will be happy to show you how to, engineer the whole experience. So on the western wall, on the opposite wall, the return procession is shown. Sacrificial bulls are led by soldiers, standard bearer, dancers, and Nubians. The barges float upstream, and the final sacrifice and offerings are made to Amun and Mut when they return back to Karnak Temple. Now, in this location, which is the processional colonnade, which was built by Amenhotep III, and we said that there were 2 rows of 7, and at Karnak there were 2 rows of 6, and at Soleb in Nubia there was a greater number, but the mold was created south of Egypt, and again, like Professor Clark said, rehearsed in Ethiopia and stage played in Egypt. Okay. In addition to Amenhotep, in this particular area, one of his successors, one of his son's successors, his name was Transformation of the Sun's Transformation. He did repairs there. Tutankhamun did repairs there. Tutankhamun actually built the thing. Horemheb, one of the kings who followed and Tutankhamun. He left his name there. Seti I, who was the father of Ramses II, he restored the primacy of Amun. And I mentioned in the first segment how the name of Amun was erased, even from his father, Cartouche, where the father's Cartouche was Amenhotep. He erased that portion of the name Amen, and his father simply was left with Hotep. So Seti restored every place where the name was removed. And a good example of this too is in Karnak Temple. Okay, we in previous sessions we've discussed the pylon. Okay, the pylon was built. The eighth pylon was built by Hatshepsut, and this is a good example. It was built by Hatshepsut in one of the earlier buildings in Karnak Temple. Now, her successor, Thutmose III, who is the great grandfather of this guy who built this, he expropriated the temple, the pylon, and erased her name. He put his name in, but the name of Amun was on the pylon. So when Amenhotep IV, the revolutionary, removed Amun's name as he did in Luxor, he also did the same in Karnak. So now Seti comes along, and we said that Seti restored Amun. So everywhere he removed Amun's name, Seti reinstated the name. And then now Ramses II comes along, and he adds his court, but he was also an expropriator because oftentimes he wrote his name over other people's names to say that this is my work. That's not to say that he didn't do magnificent work. He built Luxor Temple, he built the court, he built the museum, he built Abu Simbel, he helped his father complete Karnak and also Abydos. So he was a tremendous builder. He built the temple to the north. I can't think of the name offhand right now. That is connected with biblical history and so forth. Ramses, he was called the birth of the sun. You know, I mean, he was. It's been said he was a megalomaniac. Merneptah, his son, Merneptah, he was beloved of Ptah. He worked there. Ramses III, Ramses IV, Pinugin, who was the 26th dynasty pharaoh, and Nectanebo, even the Ethiopians of the 25th dynasty, Shabaka and Shebetiku. So all of these people, in some way or the other, was connected to this colonnade, the processional colonnade. Why it's called a processional colonnade is that in the procession, in the ascent to the inner sanctum of the temple to praise the God, you had to pass through this imposing construction of stone representing what you would call a thicket at the beginning of creation, sort of like vegetation on the side of the river where the God did his wonderful work of creation. So it's designed to awe the sacrosancts, the worshippers, but it also is a part of carrying the king's name, helping to embellish the notion of the ritual and decorating the place, creating an aura of solemnity, and that was sort of juxtaposed to the sanctuary, so that the God would come out and be a part of the ceremony in the hypostyle hall and then return to his sacred room, sort of. And these people wanted to be in such close proximity that they left their names. Um, Maspero, the Frenchman, great mind, tremendous, he had more than 100 or so pieces of literature, published works, that is, not articles and what have you. He cleared the temple in 1881 when he was the head of the antiquities department. What he did find was evidence of the consecration ceremony that took place when the temple was founded. When a temple is generally founded, the, according to the mythology in heaven, certain gods who are builders, architects, Thoth and his wife Sashat, they would lay out the parameters of the temple. And on earth, the king, acting on their behalf with the queen, would demarcate the location that was chosen for the temple and certain ceremonies that they would perform. And he found evidence of this not only at Luxor Temple, but at Deir el Bahari, which is across the river where Hatshepsut built her temple. And it was so significant that a good example is given of another queen. Her name was Tossert, and her temple was raised, and they didn't know who had built this temple. There was a temple here. There was no evidence of it, but there was a foundation evidence that was found that enabled, based on what was found in the foundation evidence,